Hello, in this video I'm going to talk about how to use Git and GitHub to collaborate on a software project. I assume that everybody already knows the basics about Git and GitHub. In particular, the basic version control concepts, some basic Git operations like commit, branch, and merge, and some common GitHub operations like clone, push, and pull. If you are new to version control, you can go read the first 3 chapters of this book called Pro Git, and this book is available for free online at this URL. In this video, we are going to focus on the collaboration part instead of the basic operations. And in Git, there are generally speaking 2 basic collaboration models. One I call the centralized model, and the other the decentralized model. This is what a centralized model looks like. Basically, all the team members share the same remote repository. And of course, each team member will have their local repository. Now, under this model, every developer have write access to the same remote repository. But to avoid unnecessary conflicts, typically, each developer will work on their own branches, and a team leader is usually in charge of the important branches, like the master branch. And the changes can be copied between branches using merge and/or rebase. And if you look at this picture, it's actually quite similar to other traditional version control systems, where you have a central repository and then all the developers have access to the same repository. Now, there are some problems with this model. Because all developers have write access to the same repository, and if you use GitHub, that means all developers must be one of the so-called collaborators on the project. Now, the first problem is that for a large project with lots of contributors, this may not be feasible. For example, for some open source project, the project leader may not even personally know all the other contributors and developers. So of course, he or she cannot give all the contributors access to the main repository. The second problem, which is actually more common in student group projects, is that one inexperienced or malicious developer could mess up the whole repository. For example, in a student project, group project, oftentimes there are some students who are new to version control, and they may commit to the wrong branch, or they may accidentally delete something, mess up the repository history, push the wrong commits, and all kinds of problems. So it's much safer to use the so-called decentralized model. Now, if you look at this picture, you can see that each developer, of course, still has their own local repository, but also each of them will have their own remote repository as well. We are assuming all the remote repositories are hosted by GitHub. Now, the team leader typically maintains the official team repository, and this team repository will have eventually have all the latest changes and will create releases and so on. But each developers also have their own remote repository. Now, changes can be shared among all those repositories either by Git remote operations, and it's shown in the middle here. You can use Git remote operations to basically pull changes from any remote repositories. Another in my opinion, easier way to do it is actually use a GitHub feature called pull requests. As shown in this picture, pull request can send changes back and forth between the remote repositories. And once you have the changes in the remote repository, then you can, pull them down into local repositories easily. Pull requests are, in my opinion, more beginner-friendly because it has a very nice web interface instead of command line, and B, it has suggestions for command line commands as well, and on top of that, it has some additional features like email notifications and comments and so on, so make collaborating a lot easier. So in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use Git carpool request to collaborate. And I'm going to use this example. I have two GitHub accounts. The Centurion accounts, I'll use it to play the role of a team leader, and it will use command line interface. And then I'll use a CYSON account to play the role of a team member, and it will use Eclipse. So the first thing I'll do is I'll put a project onto GitHub, and this is typically the responsibility of the team leader. So here I already have my project, and you can see that this is a very simple project. I have a single Java file here. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, I have a single Java file, which is a simple hello world program. Right? And in this project, if you notice, there are a couple of additional files. One git ignore file, which specifies what files should not be version controlled, and another file called pom.xml. This is a build file used by the build tool Maven, and for the purpose of this demo, we can safely ignore this file. Just consider it's a file in the project. Okay? So now I have this project here. It's not version controlled, and I want to put it on GitHub. So let's do that. This is my GitHub page, under the Centurion account. And first we create a repository for the project, and we go to repository, we say new, and I'll call it git test, and we create a repository. So now currently the repository is empty, and the GitHub will give us some help on how to import a project into this repository on command line. So we'll do that. So we'll first initialize a local repository. We'll add everything to this repository. We'll do a commit and say this is the initial commit or initial import. Let's call it initial commit. And then we have our local repository, and then we will do this to put it on GitHub. We first add the GitHub repository as a remote, and then we push the local one to the remote. Let me try again. Okay, so this should do it. And if we refresh, now we can see that this project is here. Right? So now we have completed the first step. We have a local repository, and then we also put it on GitHub. And then we move to the team member side, and the team member will fork this project on GitHub. And the effect of that is basically it will take the remote repository and then create another remote repository under the team member's account. And this is the CYSON account, and we'll do the fork here. But in order to fork that project, we have to go to that project's page, and then we click fork, and then we say we'll fork it under CYSON, and it will take a few seconds, and now it's here. Right? So this is the second step, very simple. It takes the remote, make a copy of it, steal the remote. Now, in order to actually make changes to this project, we have to clone it into a local repository, right? And on top of that, we have to import it into Eclipse so we can edit it and compile, run it, and so on. So we'll do that. And here's my Eclipse. And first we go to this perspective called Git perspective. And this is where we can clone a Git repository. So notice that this is the Git repository under the CYSON account, or the clone, the forked repository. So we copy the URL and we say clone, and it's automatically pasted here. And next finish, and yeah, then it's done. And once it's done, you can see that it's cloned in a local repository, and typically it's under the user/git folder. Then in order to use it in Eclipse, we have to go back to the Java EE perspective, and here we'll do an import. So right click and then import, and then we select which type of project it is. Because I'm using Maven to build a project, I'm actually going to import it as a Maven project. So next, and then go to the repository folder, which is here, and then click finish. And after a few seconds, it appears here. Okay. So now we have our project inside Eclipse, and if we want, we can actually run this thing, and we'll say run this, and it outputs hello world, of course. Okay. Okay, so now we have completed this step, and we have cloned the remote repository into local and imports it into Eclipse. Now comes the interesting part. We are going to commit a couple of changes and then incorporate those changes from the team members repository into the team leaders repository using a so-called pull request. So let's create a couple of changes first. So let's say we add one line and just says CY sounds change number 1, and then we save, and then we do a commit. Don't forget to put a commit message there. It's important to have commit messages so that your team members know what's going on, what are the changes about, and so on. For us, we'll put something simple. We'll say sounds change number 1, and then we commit. And then we'll make another change. We'll say, let's say sounds change number 2, and then we will commit again. And we'll say sounds change number 2. Okay, right. So now we have committed 2 changes, and then we'll do a push to push the changes to the remote repository, and just say push to upstream, and that's it. That should do it. And here, if I refresh, you can see that now this repository has 3 commits, right? CY sounds change number 1, 2. Notice that this is CY sounds repository. or in other words, it's this team members repository. Now, if we go back to the team leaders repository, if we refresh here, we can see that the team leaders repository still only has one commit, right? Because the changes are on the right. It hasn't gotten to the left repository yet. So what we do is we are going to create a so-called pull request. So go back to team members repository and then click on pull request. And then click on new pull request. So look at here, it says Centurion, that's the account, and then that's the project, then that's the branch, right? And same thing for here, account, repository, and branch. And you can think of this as taking the changes on the right and put it to the repository on the left. And this is exactly what we want to do. So we just click create pull request and say, please merge my two changes, something like that. Okay? And, this change is for some purpose, and so on. Okay? And then we create a pull request. And what happens behind the scene is that GitHub will automatically send an email to the team leaders account, and so the team leaders know that there is a pull request available. And so let's then go back to the team leaders repository, and if we refresh, we can see that now we have one pull request here, and this is the pull request. Click on it, and so we can see the information about this pull request. There are these two commits, and GitHub actually tells us that this branch has no conflicts with the base branch, so we can simply click merge pull request. There are a couple of other options you can use, and it affects how the commits are incorporated into the main branch. And my recommendation is to use always the first one, the default one, unless you know what you are doing and you are not afraid of resolving conflicts and so on. So when in doubt, use the first one, and I'm going to use the first one. I'm going to confirm, and then that's it. So this is done. Now, if we go back, we can now see that the team leaders repository now includes two changes made by CY-san. There is an additional commit, and this is called a merge commit, and it's an additional commit that has some information about where the changes come from and so on. So it's actually quite helpful to have this thing here. Don't get bothered by having one additional commit. It's useful. So now the changes are in the remote repository of the team leader. But if we look at the team leader's local repository, if we look at here, it's already opened. Let's close this and open it again. You can see that the changes are not here yet. Of course, that's because the changes are in the remote repository, but not in the local one. And we know that in order to get it into the local repository, we need to do a git pull, and this should get the changes. And if we look at here, we can see that now the team leader gets the team members changes, right? Okay, so now we have complete this step, and let's do the other way around. So oftentimes the team repository has has changes that the team members need. For example, the team leaders can add some code, or other team members can add some code, and this team member needs to get the changes from other members of the team. Right? So first, let's create the changes, and then we can see how we can use a pull request to get those changes into team members repository. So just like before, we'll make a couple of changes, and this time we'll say this is Centralized change number 1, and we'll do a git add, and we'll do a git commit, and we'll say this is Centralized change number 1. So we have made one commit, and then we add another one here, and we repeat the process, and this is change number 2. Right? Okay, so now we can push this to the remote repository. We do a git push, and if we refresh here, we can see that the team leaders repository now has 2 additional commits. Right? And if we look at the code, where can we look at the code? If we look at the code here, we can see that now the team leaders repository has these 2 changes. Okay, so now the problem is, how do we get this one into the changes from here into the team members repository? Now, you would think that one thing we can do is a team leader can create a pull request and then asking the team member to incorporate the change, right? But that's really not how it works, because typically each project only has one team leader, but it could have many team members. Now, if the team leader has to create pull requests for every change, it has to create many pull requests to many different members, and that's just too tedious, too much work. So typically, it's the responsibility of each project member to keep their repository in sync with the official repository. So what a team member can do is they can actually create a pull request to themselves, and that's actually not very difficult to do. So again, we go back to the team members repository. And we'll create a pull request. Remember that a pull request takes the changes from right and send it to the repository on the left, right? So now we want to do it this way. So the left-hand side is actually the team members repository. So it's CYSON git test, right? If you do this, GitHub automatically assume that you are trying to copy changes from branch to another branch in the same repository, but that's not what we are doing here. So click here that says compare across forks. And this gives us the option to choose repository under different accounts. So here we choose the team leaders repository. Now you can see that the right-hand side is the team leaders repository, which has the changes we want, and then we can essentially creating a pull request to ourselves. So we'll create a pull request to ourselves and say merge it me. to get in sync with the team repository. And we create a pull request, and then we accept this pull request ourselves, and then that's pretty much it. And now you can see that the team members repository now have the team leaders changes. Again, there will be an additional merge commit, and that's perfectly fine. So now the changes are here. In order to get the changes into the local repository, you know what to do. Just do a pull. And that's that. So now after this, all the repositories are in sync. Everybody has all the changes, and that's it. So this is the basics, of course. Once in a while, you'll get into some conflicts, and if that happens, read the instructions on GitHub. It has instructions on how to resolve conflicts on command line, and you can also read the ProGit book on how to resolve conflicts. It's not very difficult. So that's it. This is the end of this video.